This week's video has been 6 months in the making. It is a labor of love because as much as I am a huge horror fan, I'm also a bit of a comic book geek. I've loved comics ever since I was a little kid. Cap has always been my favorite hero, and I'm a sucker for the MCU. I gotta say, I'm an MCU fan. And as a timeline guy, this is a little bit of a sticky project, and even if you don't love the Marvel movies, you gotta stick with me because this is a crazy timeline.
So to be clear, the Marvel Universe didn't really start with Iron Man. No.
In the beginning there was Howard the Duck.
That's right, with the exception of a film serial of Captain America back in 1944, Howard the Duck was the very first feature film version of a Marvel character. That's not canon to what we know as the MCU though, and neither were 1989's The Punisher, 1990's Captain America, 1994's unreleased Fantastic Four film, 98's Blade and its sequels, the Fox X movies, the Sony Spider-Man movie series,
Pizza time.
2003's Daredevil and Elektra spin-off, 2003's Hulk film, 2004's Punisher, the Fox FF movies, the Ghost Rider films, not to mention the TV movies featuring the 1970s Spider-Man, Hulk TV show spin-off movies, Doctor Strange failed TV movie pilot, the 70s Motorcycle Captain America TV movies, Hasselhoff as Nick Fury TV movie, Generation X TV movie pilot, and the sci-fi original horror film based on Man-Thing.
I'm sure that there's more there too, but we're gonna stick to talking about the core MCU here.
Okay, so the real thing starts off back in 2008 with the debut of Iron Man. Fun fact, this movie came out on May 2nd, 2008, and I moved to Los Angeles on May 1st, and watching this movie was one of the first things I did after getting here. We meet weapons manufacturer Tony Stark and see a magazine cover dated January 2008, so we're at least past that date. Get a little family history, and there's a picture of Tony's dad, and then meet his company manager, the Dude, and best friend Luscious Lion. Tony's house is in Malibu, and in case you didn't know, this house is not actually real. Here's a picture of Christy standing at the spot at Point Doom where it's supposed to be. We meet that goop lady, and while touring Afghanistan, Tony is taken hostage. He has an injury that requires an electromagnet attached to his heart to keep him alive, and secretly builds a suit of armor so that he can become some sort of metal man.
No. We are not doing that again.
He escapes in glorious fashion, is rescued, and his driver is the big winner here.
Mikey's the big winner here tonight.
When he gets back, he wants
Hogan,
What on
drive.
earth for?
Cheeseburger first.
and then Agent Coulson shows up. And while watching the television, there's a clear date of May 4th, 2008. Tony begins the process of refining the Iron Man suit, eventually coming up with the Mark II, a sleek silver version, and Pepper gives the Tin Man a heart. So, here's an interesting bit. When we see Tony's watch, it says that it's Tuesday the 16th. If we go back to 2008, the months where that line up are September or October, provided that the days of the week line up where they do in our universe. If that's so, several months have passed while he refined and developed his armor. No one seems really holiday ready, so I'm banking on this being September. Hugh Hefner appears looking a bit different than normal, and then Stark upgrades to the Mark III armor, which is probably the most well-known Iron Man suit in the movie universe. Of course, it turns out that Stane is the villain, and oh, hey, what's this right here? There's these invoices that all have dates of May 2007 on them, but they're old invoices as Stane has been up to no good for a while now, and he's so evil that he yells at Ralphie from A Christmas Story.
Stane's just lucky that he didn't do him like he did Scut Farkus.
Tony gets suited up for the final battle, and Rhodey helps out.
Next time, baby.
Oh, Terrence.
Tony takes on Stane in his own Ironmonger suit as the hero faces the villain who's basically just like him, but bad. Finally, Pepper sets off the arc reactor, which shoots a blue beam into the sky and kills Stane, and Tony makes it known
I am Iron Man.
And we get our first post-credits setup as Nick Fury arrives to tell Tony about the Avengers Initiative, which sounds so quaint now, but literally exploded the internet of 2008. So, later on in the same year, we saw The Incredible Hulk, which was a mystery at the time. Was it a sequel to the Ang Lee Hulk movie? A reboot? It wasn't totally clear, but we did know that it was to be set in the same universe as Iron Man. We get a credit sequence retelling of his origin, which is basically the same as the old TV show version instead of the comic book version, and we meet the narrator as Bruce Banner, Half-Elf Girl as Betty Ross, William Hurt as Thunderbolt Ross, and see photos of the Hulk's destruction dated 2006 and 07, and see that they're using Stark equipment in their hunt. Bruce is hiding in Brazil, but some of his blood ends up in a bottle that makes Hugh Hefner sick, so they call in Gilder Stern to hunt him down. This results in a chain that ends up with Bruce going green, as we get our first good look at the Hulkster. Lou Ferrigno makes an appearance, as does Bill Haverchuck, and we meet Betty's new boyfriend, Phil Dunphy, as Leonard Sampson.
Wink, wink. Set up for something that will never happen.
Turns out that Ross has a bunch of bootleg super soldier serum which will give its users enhanced strength and speed, and they face off with Bruce at the university that Betty works at. Blonsky gets Blonsk, but heals up right quick, and when S.H.I.E.L.D. is tracking Bruce, a bunch of search data flashes on the screen, mostly showing dates of July 12, 2008. So if that's our date, this is happening at the same time as Iron Man, during the same period that Tony is building his suit. Banner goes to get help from Buster Scruggs, playing Dr. Samuel Stearns.
Wink, wink. Set up for another thing that will never happen, I guess.
Emil convinces Stearns to Hulk him up, becoming the Abomination and dosing himself with foreshadowing.
Never happened.
The A-bomb causes chaos, so Bruce has to transform and faces the villain, who's basically just like him, but bad. Eventually, Hulk smash, and he escapes to British Columbia to start anew. There's an end scene, before the credits actually, with Tony showing up, and it's clear that this is after Iron Man because he talks about putting a team together, meaning the Avengers, although the time frame of this single scene is up in the air. If the bulk of the film takes place in early 2008, this one could possibly take place later on at the end of Iron Man. 2 years later, Stark returns in Iron Man 2, which starts off right where we left off, introducing us to Ivan Vanko, who starts building his own arc reactor. Clearly, some time has passed as Iron Man is now on magazine covers and tells us that it's now 6 months later. Now, they may be talking about 6 months after Ivan made his reactor, so I guess it could be any amount of time, or it could just be 6 months after I Am Iron Man, so we'd be in the earlier part of 2009 here. Tony's back in a new Mark IV armor, and he shows film of his dad who's been recast to a madman, and Stan makes his cameo early on in this one as Larry King. And Kate Mara.
Yeah, she's a big deal. I'm sure that she's actually going to play a major role in this movie, right?
And she's gone. The awesome late Gary Shandling is here, as is Justin Hammer, otherwise known as Chuck Barris, and he says Tony has created Iron Man in the last 6 months, so that's firm. We're 6 months after the first film, and presumably 2009. Rhodey shows up and hey!
Look, it's me. I'm here. Deal with it. Let's move on.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'll drop it.
Tony's computer says that it's Monday the 2nd, 2009, or I guess Monday in February 2009. This is a weird way to write a date, but if it's February, that would kind of line up with me thinking the ending of the first one was September, and Tony's got blood poisoning from the arc reactor. This new assistant shows up, and I'm sure that she's exactly who she appears to be, right? Well, her resume starts the problems. She was an intern with Hammer until 2010, and has been with Stark from 2010 to present, and at Harvard in June of 2010, so we have to be past that then. So here's where I say that Marvel has put out their own timeline, placing the first Iron Man movie in 2010 and this one in 2011. Based on the 2008 dating visible in the first movie, that really doesn't seem possible, but either that one date is off, or this one is, so I guess we'll have to pick eventually. Christine is back, and Pepper says that her fling with Tony was last year, which works if you place this one in early 09, or 11, I guess, and the first one in 08 or 10, whichever one that we end up with. Vanko is here, and this Monte Carlo poster shows 08-09 up on it, so does that mean this is 09? Whiplash attacks, and people call this scene out, saying how did he know that Tony was going to race when it was unexpected, although I don't know why Ivan couldn't have been planning to attack Tony at the fancy function, and then changed his plan to the racetrack when he saw Tony on TV hastily taking the place of a crew worker. The Suitcase Mark V armor is unveiled, and soon Vanko and the Hammer are teaming up, and then, wow, here's where we go completely buggy. While researching Vanko, Tony's computer shows the date as May 6, 2010, which doesn't really line up with anything. Although, if it's correct, then the I Am Iron Man moment happened in late 09. It's Tony's birthday, and he's a little out of control, so Rhodes suits up to fight him. Fury finally shows up, and Natalie is revealed to be the Black Widow, and Coulson pops back in, and Tony says that his dad has been dead for almost 20 years. He died in 91, so either 09, 10, or 11 would basically work, I guess. The Shield makes another appearance, and Coulson says he's needed in New Mexico, which will be important later, and we get another computer view, and it's still showing that Monday 2-9 number, so that's not a date, so we'll just forget that. Although we're still at square one with knowing what year this really is, but this shot lets us know how much time has passed in this movie. In the beginning of the film, it was day 1 of the expo, and now there's 343 days left, so the whole film takes place over the course of less than a month. Tony's new reactor works, and stop! Hammer time! Rhodes becomes War Machine, and Tony upgrades to Mark 6, and Vanko begins his attack. This little kid appears, who I guess could maybe be Peter Parker, I don't know. Black Widow unleashes, Hammer gets arrested, and they face off with Whiplash, who's now basically just like them, but bad. He self-destructs, and in the aftermath, Tony's watching the news, and it's a live report on the Hulk at the college campus, which places that film at the same time as this one. I guess it means that those emails don't matter, but we either have to ignore the dates in this film or the first Iron Man, and that one only had one on-screen 08, and this one has several on-screen 2010s, so we'll put this one at 2010 real time, which makes the Hulk the same year, and the first film as 09. Finally, the post-credit scene sets up the events of Thor, implying the events of that film would take place in the same time frame. 1 year later, in 2011, the Marvel machine was in full swing with Thor, introducing Matilda right away, and her computer seems to say that it's May 6th, the same day as was shown on Tony's computer earlier. And then we bounce back to 965 AD in Norway to see Asgard take on the Frost Giants, and we're introduced to Hannibal Odin. Thor in his awesome helmet.
Check that thing out, because we don't get to see it after this.
And then his half-brother Loki. Thor's hammer.
The hammer is his penis. Actually, it's just a hammer.
His friends are called the Warriors 3, as well as Sif, and then there's Stringer Bond as Heimdall, who controls the Rainbow Bridge, gateway to other worlds. Thor pisses off Daddy and is deemed unworthy and stripped of his powers, hammer, and his place in Asgard as he's banished to Earth, where he's picked up by Jane and a broke girl and one of the Father Marins. We see that post-credit bit with a Stan Lee cameo included, letting us know that we're set in the time frame of Iron Man 2, so I guess we're in 2010 here, and we get the revelation that Loki is not the son of Odin, but is actually the son of Laufey, the frost giant, and damn, this is really long, and I'm only 4 movies in, and...
Why am I doing this again?
Our people need a sense of continuity.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
We meet S.H.I.E.L.D. Agent Sitwell and Agent Clint Barton, otherwise known as Hawkeye, and when Loki takes over Asgard, the Warriors come to Earth. This S.H.I.E.L.D. computer also says that it's May 6th, so I guess those numbers aren't actually dates after all, because this is a few days after we saw that on Jane's computer, so that doesn't actually matter. But at least we know that we're in line with Iron Man 2. Thor literally reforms overnight and fights the Destroyer, becoming worthy again in the process, and goes back to Asgard for a face-off with Loki, who, hey, isn't just like him but bad.
What do you know?
In order to save Asgard, Thor destroys the Rainbow Bridge, therefore cutting them off from the other realms forever.
Really? Like, forever?
And Loki is lost between worlds. The post-credit scene gives us Fury, introduces the cosmic-looking cube, and lets us know that Loki is still alive. Released with the Thor DVD was the one-shot The Consultant. It takes place at the same time as the ending of The Incredible Hulk, after Iron Man 2, so it's in that same year. Later on that same year, we get the next chapter with Captain America, the First Avenger. We start off in present day with a discovery in the ice and then bounce to Norway in 1942, where we meet Agent Smith and Hot Fuzz's Arthur Webley, and finally the Human Torch, or, tiny skinny Steve Rogers, who we can see was born on the 4th of July in 1918. He gets his catchphrase,
I can do this all day.
and the enlistment form tells us that it's actually June 14th, 1943, and this is his best friend, Bucky. They go to the 43 Expo, see the android Human Torch, Bucky's girl is impossible, and Howard Stark is here as a third actor takes on the role for his younger version. Steve meets Dr. Erskine, while Johan meets Arnim Zola, and they have that cube from Thor, and it's called the Tesseract. Agent Carter makes her first appearance as well, and Erskine basically explains that he created this formula to make a super soldier, and Johan had already tried it out, but had unfortunate side effects, and now they're going to try the same formula on Steve. So I'd probably been a little bit more nervous about it. They conduct the experiment, which makes Steve like super buff. But Erskine is killed. This newspaper tells us that it's now June 23rd, so we're only 9 days from that earlier paper, and wow, that's a little quick. We bounce ahead a while, and Cap suits up and gets his shield, and you know, I just never get tired of seeing someone punch a Nazi.
Remember, kids, the only good Nazi is a punched one. And even then, they're not good. It'll just make you feel good to punch them.
It's now November, and I completely neglected mentioning that Agent K is in this, and Steve has to become a real hero to save Bucky. Turns out that Johan is the Red Skull, Cap faces temptation from Marjorie Tyrell, and then gets his new outfit in S.H.I.E.L.D. There's a montage of scenes of him ruining Skull's ops, so we'll have to assume that some time would pass and would most likely extend into the next year, so we'd probably be in 1944 by now. Buck is eventually killed.
Yeah, sure.
And RS builds his Hydra army, and they capture Cap so that he can say it.
I can do this all day.
See? Catchphrase.
The crew repels in, although I'm not sure why they needed Cap to get caught. This window's pretty obvious. Couldn't they have just mounted an assault through it with more stealth without Cap getting captured? Cap has a final showdown with Skull, who's basically just like him, but bad. In a high-tech jet, but Reddy's consumed by the cube. Steve crashes the jet into the ice, saying goodbye to Peggy, and we flash ahead to the end of the war, so 1945 now, and they retrieve the Tesseract. And then we see Cap wake up in the present day, and Fury shows up to say that it's been almost 70 years, so it could be anywhere up to 2014, really, and the post-credit scene is actually just a trailer for the Avengers. There was another one-shot on the Cap DVD called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Thor's Hammer, and as the title says, it takes place during the events of Thor as Coulson heads to the Hammer's resting spot, so it's in the same year. The following summer in 2012, they all came together in The Avengers, which starts right off with Fury and Aunt Robin, and Selvig is here, as is Hawkeye. And then Loki shows back up, as well as he was saved by aliens. He has this scepter thing with him that can take over people's minds, and the Widow's back too. This computer screen has a date of 12/2/2012, so depending on the format, it's either February 12th or December 2nd. Bruce Banner's back too, but he's a little more Ruffalo now, and Natasha says it's been more than a year since he last turned, so the last time we saw him change in his last movie wasn't the last time that he did change, since that would be more like 2009 or something. Cap's back, Tony and Pepper are back, Coulson's here, and we meet Loki's alien ally, and if you're a Buffy fan, you may be shocked to know that this guy is Wesley. Another computer screen shows that same 12/2 date, and it's definitely at least a day later, so maybe that's not a date and more of a S.H.I.E.L.D. code, and then Loki kills more people.
Loki kills a lot of innocent people. I just want to point that out for when we're supposed to like him later.
Cap gets a new suit, and they capture Loki, so Thor shows up. He just got back to Earth, so I guess so much for destroying the Bifrost means never seeing Earth again. We finally get almost everyone in one room, and then Fury says that Thor leveled a small town a year ago. So we now know that we're 1 year after that movie, and in turn, 1 year after Iron Man 2 and the Hulk. So I guess 2011? The glowy rock and the scepter seems to affect people. The Hulk gets a new look, and Coulson is killed, and since we're dealing with movies only and no shows, he's really dead. Hawkeye is restored, and the crew head to New York to stop Loki. Iron Man goes Mark 7, big glowing beam shoots up into the sky, and the Chitauri come through, leading to all-out war on the streets. There's posters up promoting events in 2012, but if we're in 2011, they could just be advertising future events. We get that big team shot that every comic book fan never thought that they'd see, and they manage to close off the portal and win the day. Stan sneaks in right at the end, and Thor takes away Loki and also the Tesseract, and that closes out Phase 1. So, Marvel's official timeline actually places this one in 2012, with Iron Man 2, Thor, and Hulk taking place 1 year earlier in 2011, which jives with the internal verbal aspect of the timeline, making Iron Man 1 in 2010, even though those dates don't line up with the on-screen imagery for the most part, but I guess if that's what they're saying, I really can't argue with it. The mid-credit scene reveals who the bad guys are working for, and it's purple bad guy Thanos. The one-shot Item 47 appeared on the Avengers DVD and tells of us a young couple who use a discarded Chitauri weapon and use it to rob banks. It takes place a short time after the Avengers, so that's set at the same time as that one. So now 1 year later, 5 years after the original film, we get Iron Man 3, which starts off with a firm date of 1999, New Year's Eve. And it looks like we're 99 going into 2000, and Tony's here, Happy's here, and we see Yinsen, and this is the event that Yinsen said he met Tony at when they met in the cave. We meet a Leonard, and Tony's girl for the night, Maya, and then bounce to what it says is present day. And it's obviously right around Christmas because, Shane Black. We're apparently on Mark 42 now, so enough time has passed between this and Avengers for Tony to make 35 more suits. Gandhi shows up as the Mandarin, and the Grim Reaper shows up as the President, while Rhodey changes from War Machine to Iron Patriot. Tony's got PTSD from New York, and Killian's back but upgraded, working for AIM, but I guess doesn't have to wear a beekeeper mask. And he introduces Extremis, and Happy Skypes Tony, and it shows the date as Tuesday, 12/22. So I guess December 22nd, right before Christmas, but looking at our calendar, the only years that the 22nd fell on a Tuesday were 2010 and 2015. So unless this is several years after Avengers, it's most likely that the days of the week don't line up with our universes. Killian then says that he invited Tony to join AIM 13 years ago, so depending upon if he's considering that New Year's Eve to be 99 or 2000, he could be talking about 2012 or 2013. If it's 12, then this is the December after the Avengers, just later on in the same year, but if it's 13, it's a full year and a half later. The official Marvel timeline shows it as 2012, which makes more sense when you consider Tony's panic attacks, and is a more accurate 13 years given the fact that we're in December anyway. When Happy almost gets blown up by an exploding man, and in this bunch of computer screens, I see 12-1-12, which seems to point out that this is 2012, and Maya's back, and Tony's house gets blown up by the Mandarin's team, destroying everything. His house gets blown up because he issues a challenge to the Mandarin and then just kind of walks around his house with no defense systems going, with just an experimental armor nearby, while missiles come at him that for some reason Jarvis just kind of forgets to mention to him, and then he ends up in Tennessee.
That whole thing is really complicated.
And he meets Little Harley, who gives him a newspaper that tells us that it's December 23rd, 2013, which I guess I'm just assuming is a misprint. Killian is in league with Mandarin, but Tony is in league with Patty the Daytime Hooker, and fights some extremist soldiers. And then the news doesn't give us a date, but does let us know that there's traffic concerns near LAX.
Yeah, like that's news.
Stan cameos, and we see that Extremis' Phase 1 test was back in 2009, so in Marvel's official timeline, before Tony became Iron Man. Maya's bad too, but in a wild twist, the Mandarin turns out to be an actor named Trevor and not the villain after all. Killian is the actual bad guy and gave Pepper Extremis, kills Maya, and kidnaps the president. Tony activates the House Party Protocol, which activates all of the suits, which I guess, probably would have been a thing to do while his house was being destroyed. And then there's a final face-off with Killian, who's nothing like him, and bad. But Super Pepper actually gets in the final blow. Tony then destroys all of his suits, removes his arc reactor heart, and stops being Iron Man forever. The post-credit scene doesn't set anything up, it's just a joke with Tony and Banner. The Iron Man 3 DVD also had a one-shot entitled Agent Carter, which takes place 1 year after the end of Captain America, so it would be 1946, and leads into her 2-season television show of the same name. Later on in that same year, Thor got his first sequel with Thor 2: The Dark World, largely considered to be the black sheep of the bunch, and kicks off thousands of years ago with the Dark Elf Doctor Number 9 and a red goo called the Ether, which the Asgardians hide away. We jump ahead to present day, seemingly right after the events of the Avengers with Loki and Odin, and then Thor's back, and the Bifrost is now completely fixed. Sif and the W3 are here too, although one of them has been recast to be a little more Chuckish. Jane and Darcy are back, but Eric's gone wild, and the Ether bonds with Jane like some sort of space symbiote.
Symbiote? Symbiote?
Heimdall's here too, and Thor and Jane are reunited, go to Asgard. Rene Russo gets a little more screen time here finally, and we sort of get a version of Curse here, and the elves invade, resulting in Frigga's death. Stan cameos, and Thor teams up with Loki to find Malekith, and on Earth, the police record sure looks like it says 2013. Elfie gets the Ether, but Loki is killed, and the battle heads back to Earth, where Thor has his final face-off, who's not the same as him, so it seems like Thor's the only one who doesn't ever just fight his own evil opposite. He manages to take him out, and when Thor goes home, we finally get some good info. Darcy says the last time he left, he was gone for 2 years, and she's talking about him leaving at the ending of his first film, placing this 2 years after that. And since we all know that Avengers was 1 year after that, this is 1 year after Avengers as well. There's also a 2013 calendar hanging up on the wall right behind Jane, so it's pretty clear that they wanted this to be seen. That makes this 2013, Avengers 2012, and Thor, Iron Man 2, and Hulk all in 2011 since they take place at the same time, which does line up with Marvel's official timeline. That makes the first Iron Man film takes place in 2010, then confirmed. So this movie does a lot in a very little amount of time to shore up our timeline. We discover Loki's not dead and replaced Odin, and in the series' first mid-credits scene, we see Sif and Volstagg meet Space Fenster, who will flip you for real, and we learn that both the Ether and the Tesseract are Infinity Stones, and that there's 6 of those in total, which we'll soon see is a bit of a thing. The Dark World DVD contains the final Marvel one-shot, this one focusing on Trevor Slattery in the aftermath of Iron Man 3, and most likely takes place shortly afterwards. Most interesting thing about this short, for all those who hated the Mandarin twist, is that it's revealed that there actually is a real Mandarin. So that way everyone kind of wins, especially since it looks like we'll be revisiting that concept in the near future. 2014 kicked off with Cap's return in Captain America the Winter Soldier, and Steve's back and meets Sam Wilson, gets picked up by Nat, and fights Batroc the Leaper, whose facial hair is just disappointing compared to the source material. There's a bunch of computer files from early 2013 here, so we're at least in mid to late 13, and it turns out the S.H.I.E.L.D. is outfitting helicarriers with weaponry. And at the Smithsonian, we see that Bucky did indeed die in 1944, and Steve goes to see old Peggy, a scene that's really different after you've watched Endgame. Fury goes to the Sundance Kid, senior S.H.I.E.L.D. official, and then gets ambushed by a mysterious wintry soldier, who seemingly kills him. At the hospital, there's this whiteboard saying that it's April of 2013, so that seems to be our year here, and this would be 1 year after the Avengers then, although shortly afterwards there's interrogation footage dated October of 2013. So even though it's not clear what month it is, I guess it's clear what year it is. Cap then has the famous elevator fight with Hydra agents, including Brock Rumlow, future Crossbones, and then this flash drive has a bunch of files from 2013, and one of them is August 20th, so I'm thinking that October date is the more accurate one. Cap then says that he's 95 years old, and if he was born in 1918, that makes October of 2013 work. It turns out that Arnim Zola has been coded into a computer, and he reaffirms Cap's birth date and tells us that Natasha was born in 1984, which would make her 29 here. But then he says that he was taken prisoner in 1945, but he was captured in the same mission that Bucky died in, which the Smithsonian says was 1944. But I'm going to trust the computer guy that was actually there, and the ending of the first Cap movie mostly takes place in 45 then. We find out that Hydra has been alive inside of S.H.I.E.L.D. since the end of the war, and reconfirms Howard Stark's death is happening in 91, and also confirms that Steve went into the ice in 45. It turns out that Sam used to have an experimental flight suit, and it also turns out that both Sitwell and Senator Stern are both Hydra, so they break out the Falcon. Sitwell mentions Stephen Strange, insinuating he's active at this point, but it also says that Zola's algorithm determines future threats, so it might know of his destiny. Sitwell is then killed by the Winter Soldier, who we discover is a revived and brainwashed Bucky, but of course Fury's actually also alive. Stan cameos, as does Abed, and then there's a big final face-off with everyone, and can I just geek out here for a second?
Cap was always my favorite growing up, and my favorite era was when Cap and Falcon were partners.
Seeing them both up on the screen and both so cool is a dream come true. Cap has a face-off with Winter Soldier, who's basically just like him, but bad. But it doesn't matter here because he's awesome, while Sam takes on Crossbones, and Nick and Nat take care of Pierce. Brock gets smushed while Cap gets through to Buck. S.H.I.E.L.D. is disbanded. Maria Hill goes to Stark. Stern goes down, but Crossbones is born. Then they go to Fury's fake tombstone, and his death year is deliberately hidden, but that kinda looks more like a 4 than a 3 to me. And oddly enough, Marvel's official timeline places this one in 14, but the film evidence points more to 13, so I'm keeping that until something proves otherwise, the mid-credit scene involves Baron Strucker, who has Loki's scepter, and Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch setting up Avengers 2, while the post-credit scenes lets us know that Bucky is getting his mind back. A little later that same year, Marvel branched out from the core Avengers with Guardians of the Galaxy, a mostly unknown property at the time and considered a big risk. It kicks off in 1988 on Earth, showing a young Peter Quill as he loses his mother to cancer and then gets kidnapped by aliens. We then jump ahead to 26 years, so we have a solid date for this one for once, and it's 2014 here. Pete's all grown up and steals an orb and is being chased by Grant, and we meet our villain Ronan the Accuser. He's working with Thanos along with his daughters Uhura and Amy Pond. Stan cameos, and this is Rocket and his pal Groot, otherwise known as Limitless, and Riddick. Peter, Gamora, Rocket, and Groot all get arrested by Dewey Cox and his boss freaking Meryl Streep, not to mention Pete. They go to space prison, and Lloyd Kaufman is there, as well as Mal Reynolds, although a big blue version of him, and Drax the Destroyer. Ronan kills the other, and we get a better look at Thanos, now with a voice by Josh Brolin, and the Collector is back, and we get more info on the Infinity Stones, and what the gang has is one of them. Ronan gets his hands on it and plans to destroy Xandar, the home of the Space Cops, so everyone teams up to stop him. Gamora faces Nebula, who's her sister, and it's kinda just like her, but bad. Drax defeats side villain Korath, even though it's Hyman Hunso, who easily could have been a main baddie in one of these things. Nebula escapes, and Groot sacrifices his life to save his friends, and the team unites to wield the stones.
We're the Guardians of the Galaxy.
And then defeat Roni. Peter finds out that he's only half human, and his dad was an alien, and the crew heads out for more adventures, and baby Groot is born. The post-credit scene is the most important one of all, featuring the MCU debut of the very first Marvel star ever, Howard the freaking Duck. The following year, in 2015, the full team is back with the Avengers Age of Ultron, and Hawkeye, Widow, Iron Man and Mark 43, Thor, Cap, and Hulk are all here, just, posing and stuff, fighting Hydra. Scarlet and Quickie are back, and Wanda gives Tony a vision of the team dead in space, and they say that S.H.I.E.L.D. is collapsed, so we're after the Winter Soldier. And they've retrieved Loki's scepter. And Tony uses it to help create his Ultron program, a defense system for the world. Ultron researches Tony with dates confirming the Mark I from February of 2010, shifting that date on screen and locking that down, and more info from August of 2010, which would be the latter part of that film, and shots of Maria Hill in the Avengers from April of 2012, locking that in as well. And then Ultron kills Jarvis. Rhodes and Sam are here, as is Stan, and Ulti makes a body, sounds a lot like Robert California, and recruits the twins, and then also Gollum, who loses an arm. Hulk goes wild, so Tony unleashes the Mark 44 Hulkbuster armor, which actually defeats Hulk, even though, come on,
Hulk is strongest one there is.
We meet Hawkeye's family, and his wife is all jinkies, and Nick finally pops in, as does Selvig, and Ultron builds a new body and puts the stone from the scepter in it. Thor has a vision of the gem in the scepter, the Power Stone from Guardians, the Aether, and the Tesseract, while the twins switch sides, but Nat gets captured, which I'm sure will be a major deal. Jarvis is alive, so they put it into Ultron's wannabe body, and it comes to life, becoming the Vision. He can lift Thor's hammer, and Bruce just kind of frees Widow, and that whole storyline is just over with, I guess. There's a big final face-off with Ultron and his army of drones, with Nick and Rhodes joining in, but Quicksilver gets killed, which is alright because the other universe version of him was way cooler. They save the day, Hulk just flies away somewhere, Ultron is destroyed, They get a new headquarters, and Cap says he went into the ice 75 years ago, which would technically make this set in 2020, so just figure that Steve is rounding up here. And there's no indications of years here, but we know it's past 2013 at least, and they've been clearing out Hydra for some time, so let's roll with real-time 2015 for now, since that's what the official Marvel timeline calls it. Cap almost says it.
Avengers!
And our mid-credit scene gives us more Thanos as he reveals his gauntlet. A little later that same year, we get the closing out of Phase 2 with AntMan, our first new solo hero adventure since Captain America. It starts in 1989 with Howard Stark, just 2 years before his death, Peggy, still hot in what would have been her 60s, and new guys Jack Colton, and man, I hope somebody catches that reference. Hank resigns from S.H.I.E.L.D. over something called Pym particles, and then we bounce to what it calls present day, so maybe in 2015? Grown-up Tommy Doyle is here, getting out of prison and meeting up with Mr. Rourke, and goes to work at the Baskin, and there's calendars up on this door for November and December, and the dates line up with those of 2014, so that could be our year, although I think we've seen the calendars here don't always line up. We meet Hank's daughter Hope and Darren Cross, and it turns out that Hank used to shrink down with Pym particles as Ant-Man to help fight, and Darren has created a new Yellow Jacket shrinking suit. Meanwhile, Scott has a daughter, and his ex-wife is also from the Halloween universe and is remarried now, and Scott breaks into Hank's house, but all that's there is this suit. The suit shrinks him, and while shrunken, he rides flying ants, and this newspaper lets us know that we're set after Age of Ultron, so if that's 2015, then so is this. Hank says that he's created Pym particles 40 years ago, so mid-70s, and oddly, they say that he kept this force and mass of a full-size guy when he shrinks down, which makes him riding on an ant seem kinda weird.
I mean, wouldn't he just crush it?
Scott can't shrink too small or he'll enter the quantum realm and be lost, and they plan to go steal the Yellow Jacket suit. Hank reveals his wife was the Wasp and was lost to the quantum realm back in 1987, and Scott has to break into the Avengers complex and meets Falcon, and then they commence the big heist. They use a keychain that's a shrunken down tank to escape, although wait, I mean, don't objects keep the same mass? How was he carrying this in his pocket? Cross dons the Yellow Jacket suit and goes after Cassie, so there's a small face-off with Scott taking on Cross, who's basically just like him, but bad. And instead of a huge battle for the fate of the world in a city, we get a tiny battle for the fate of a little girl in a bedroom. Scott goes quantum to destroy the Yellow Jacket suit, which kills Cross, and luckily Anti escapes pretty easily. Stand cameos, there's mention of someone who can crawl on walls, and a mid-credit scene shows us the Wasp suit, and a post-credit scene shows us Cap and Sam finding Bucky, setting up the next adventure.
So there you have it. That is Phase 1 and 2. This is to be continued next week when we'll go into Phase 3 to finish out the MCU. But for this one, let's take a look to see where our timeline stands so far.
Okay, now if you want to actually watch these movies in the order in which that they occur instead of the order that they were released, here's what we're looking at. Captain America, the first Avenger, takes place during the years of 43 to 45. Iron Man takes place in 2010, spanning about 6 months or so. 6 months later, in the early part of 2011, is Iron Man 2, and at the same time as those events is The Incredible Hulk, also in 2011. Shortly afterwards, in that same year, is Thor, and then 1 year later in 2012, The Avengers occurs. Later on that same year at Christmas time is Iron Man 3, and then sometime in early 2013 is Thor 2 The Dark World, and Captain America 2 The Winter Soldier. Winter Soldier taking place in the later part of the year, Thor taking place sometime during the year, most likely the early part, I'm going to guess. In 2014, Guardians of the Galaxy takes place, and 1 year later, Avengers Age of Ultron takes place in 2015, and later that same year, AntMan occurs.
So there it is. This is a pretty satisfying crop of movies. There's some weak links in here, there's some things in here that just aren't as great as the others, but overall, I did not mind watching any of these movies again. There's none of them that I think are just bad. There's some that are better than others, but none that are just terrible. Like I said earlier, part 2 of this video is coming next week, where we'll get into phase 3 and do the entire thing and finish out this timeline, starting where we left off. Let me know what you thought of this one down below. Any questions or comments that you got, leave them down there in that comments. Like, subscribe, check out my patrons over here, and we'll see you next week for part 2 of the MCU.